If you can dance this waltz, I'll marry my son to you." William Thompson III sneered, his voice carrying across the ballroom, loud enough for Manhattan's elite to hear. He raised his champagne glass and pointed it at the black woman who had just stumbled, shattering a crystal tray on the marble floor. The crash silenced the room. 200 guests at the grand opening of Thompson Holdings' new skyscraper turned their eyes to Kesha Williams, 35, a contract cleaner who had only been working the gallery events for 3 weeks. "Dad, you're being ridiculous," whispered Jonathan Thompson, 28, his face hot with embarrassment at his father's cruelty. But William ignored him. Drunk on whiskey and arrogance, he strutted to the center of the floor like a judge taking his seat. "Oh, no. Let me finish," he declared. "This woman clearly doesn't have the coordination to clean properly. Why don't we test if she can even move to a beat?" Kneeling on the marble, Kesha picked up the glass shards with trembling hands, yet her eyes betrayed no fear, no shame. What lay there was something else, an unsettling calm. She studied every word, every laugh, every look of disdain around her as though measuring them. "Mr. Thompson, perhaps it would be better." The event manager began. "A better nothing," William snapped, cutting him off with a theatrical gesture. "A play, a waltz. If she dances better than my wife, I'll marry my son to her right here. Imagine it. The heir to the Thompson fortune marrying the cleaning lady." The crowd erupted with cruel laughter. Women covered their mouths in mock shock, while men chuckled as if it were all an acceptable joke. Slowly, Kesha rose to her feet. She wiped her hands on her apron and fixed her gaze on William Thompson. For a moment that stretched into forever, she said nothing. It was as if she were weighing a choice that could upend the power in that room. Finally, her voice rang out, clear and sharp like steel. "I accept." And the ballroom fell into silence. Even the orchestra stopped, bows frozen in midair, confused by the turn the night had taken. William blinked, swaying slightly, as though the whiskey had suddenly betrayed him. "What did you say?" "Oh," he demanded, his arrogance cracking for the first time. "I said, I accept your challenge," Kesha repeated. Her voice was steady, her smile faint but deliberate, carrying an edge that unsettled even those who had laughed the loudest. "But when I dance better than your wife, you will keep your word, joke or not." The room erupted again, laughter doubling in cruelty, the sound bouncing off the marble walls. To them, this was comedy, a spectacle no different from a circus. None of them noticed the glint in Kesha's eyes. A glint that had once captivated sold-out audiences in Paris, London, and New York. A glint that belonged not to a cleaner, but to a star. William's wife, Victoria Thompson, stepped forward. 50 years old, a face hardened by money and years of carefully maintained status, she smiled as though the outcome were already decided. Known across Manhattan for teaching ballroom to the wives of the wealthy, she looked down on Kesha with venom. "Oh, darling, do you really think I should lower myself to compete with this person?" she sneered, flicking her manicured hand toward Kesha as though brushing away dust. Don't be modest, Victoria," William chuckled, relishing the performance. "You won that Club Waltz trophy last year. That should be more than enough to show her place." Kesha said nothing. Her body was still, but her mind drifted backward, 15 years ago, when the world had known her not as Kesha Williams, a cleaner, but as Kesha Marrow, principal dancer of the American National Ballet. She remembered the ovations, the reviews that named her among the greats, the sensation of soaring across stages lit by golden chandeliers. And she remembered the end, the limo crash, 3 months in a coma, the doctor's cold voice, "You will never dance again." Yet here she was, standing, breathing, a spark still alive. Jonathan!" William barked, snapping his son from his thoughts. "Get your camera. I want this moment recorded for history. The night a cleaning lady thought she could pass as a dancer in my ballroom." Jonathan hesitated, shifting uncomfortably. His jaw tightened as he looked at Kesha, then back at his father. "Dad," he said softly, "this has gone too far. She was just doing her job." But William cut him off with a wave, too intoxicated with his own cruelty to hear. The orchestra waited. The crowd held its breath, not because they believed in Kesha, but because they wanted blood, public humiliation. And only Kesha knew the truth. The waltz had not begun, yet the stage was already hers. William sneered, his words dripping with venom. "Oh, the girl accepts the challenge. Good. Now she's going to entertain us." Or he glanced at Jonathan with a mocking grin. "Should I remind your girlfriend about that little incident last week?" Jonathan's face drained of color. The threat was clear. Blackmail, another weapon in William's arsenal of cruelty. Kesha saw it all, the manipulation, the power games, the toxic control William wielded over everyone in his orbit. It only strengthened her resolve. Put the music on. William barked at the DJ and place your bets. $500 on Victoria. $1,000 if you've got the nerve to back the maid. The room erupted with laughter. Hands shot up. Bets exchanged like poker chips. The humiliation of a woman had become their evening's entertainment. Victoria Thompson strutted to the center of the polished floor. She lifted her arms, performed a few dramatic stretches, and smirked at her husband's audience. Every move was calculated, a show of practiced elegance. William sauntered toward Kesha, leaning in close enough for only her to hear. His smile was a razor. When you lose, and you will lose, I want you on your knees, begging for forgiveness. Then, of course, you're fired. But something in Kesha shifted. Her eyes no longer trembled with fear. What glowed there now was the same fire that had once commanded the world's greatest stages. The same will that had carried her through months of agony and physical therapy when doctors told her she'd never walk again. The same dignity that had kept her alive when life stripped her of everything. A Mr. Thompson, she said, her voice low but steady, a calm so sharp it made more than one guest shiver. When I win, and I will win, I want you to keep your word about the marriage. But I also want something else. And the crowd hushed. William raised an eyebrow, amused. Oh, she dares to make demands? Very well. What is it, cleaner? What else could you possibly want besides marrying my son? Kesha's chin lifted. I want you to admit in front of all these people that you judged a woman wrongly because of her skin and because of her work. And I want your apology, public, sincere. The ballroom tensed, the laughter thinning into whispers. Guests shifted uncomfortably. This was no longer a spectacle of cruelty. This was a challenge that cut at the heart of the empire William had built on fear. William barked a laugh that filled the room. You've got nerve, I'll give you that. Fine, I accept. But when you humiliate yourself out there, you'll leave this place with nothing. Not a job, not dignity, not even your pride. He turned away, already savoring her defeat. But what William Thompson III did not know, what no one in that glittering room knew, was that Kesha Williams was no ordinary woman. She was a storm contained in silence, a dancer who had tasted both the ecstasy of glory and the abyss of ruin. And tonight she was about to remind the world of the brutal truth. There is a canyon of difference between those who learn to dance as a pastime and those who were born to turn dance into a language spoken by the soul itself. Victoria warmed up with her elegant but mechanical ballroom steps, smiling smugly. And across the floor, Kesha stood completely still, her body motionless. But in her mind, every movement, every turn, every step of the waltz was already alive, flowing with the precision of a machine and the passion of a heart that had never stopped beating in rhythm. The orchestra tightened their bows. The crowd leaned forward. The storm was about to break. 15 years of brutal physical therapy. 15 years of learning to walk again. 15 years of swallowing the bitter truth that she would never be the same. Those years had forged a resilience in Kesha that none of the pampered rich kids in that ballroom could possibly comprehend. Look at her, one guest whispered, not even bothering to lower her voice. That she's probably never stepped on a dance floor in her life. Oh, what unnecessary humiliation. Another chuckled, fanning herself with a jeweled hand. William Thompson prowled the room like a predator fattened on cruelty, his champagne glass flashing under the chandeliers. 500 says she can't even make it through the song without tripping, he called out, delighting in the roar of laughter that followed. They 1,000 if you think she'll run off before it's done. Money passed from manicured hand to manicured hand. Bets were scribbled onto napkins. The humiliation had turned into a game. But Kesha noticed something William did not. Jonathan wasn't laughing. His jaw was tight, his hands clenched in his pockets, his eyes fixed on the floor as though he couldn't bear to look at his father's circus. And then it hit her. She had seen him before. 3 weeks ago, on her very first day working for Thompson Holdings, she had noticed the one young executive who treated the contract workers with respect. The only one who said thank you. The only one who saw them as people, not furniture. It was him, Jonathan. Miss! The voice was so low she almost thought she imagined it. Kesha turned. A man in his 60s stood nearby in the crisp, discreet uniform of the building's security staff. "I'm Marcus, head of security." He pretended to adjust the radio on his shoulder as he leaned closer. "I know who you are." Kesha froze. "I saw you dance before," Marcus continued, his voice no louder than a whisper. 15 years ago, National Theater. You were Kesha Merrow, principal soloist." Her heart thundered in her chest. After years of hiding, of burying her name and her past beneath cleaning jobs and night shifts, someone had recognized her. "I thought you died in the accident," Marcus said, his eyes wide with disbelief. "The papers said you'd never dance again." "The papers said a lot of things," Kesha replied, her voice steady but her hands trembling against her apron. Not all of it was true. Marcus studied her for a long moment, his face etched with something between awe and sorrow. "What they did to you back then was an injustice. But what he's doing to you now," his eyes flicked toward William, who was still collecting bets like a carnival barker, "is worse." And in that instant, something hardened inside Kesha. A choice she had been postponing for 15 years was suddenly made. This wasn't just about a dance anymore. This was about reclaiming who she truly was. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice calm but commanding, "I need a favor. After I dance, no matter what happens, I want you to record everything. Every word, every reaction, especially his." Marcus blinked confused but nodded once slowly. He could see it in her eyes now. The storm, the defiance, the woman who had been written off as broken was about to rise again. For the first time that night, Kesha smiled, a small, controlled smile, but one that carried the weight of defiance of him. Because some people needed to be reminded that underestimating someone based on their appearance could be the most expensive mistake of their lives. But William wasn't finished. He wanted blood. "You know what?" he shouted, raising his champagne glass high. "Let's make this even more interesting. If she can finish the song without falling or stopping, I'll give her $1,000. He paused, letting the anticipation drip through the room like poison. "But when she fails, and she will fail, I want her to clean this entire room, on her knees, in front of all of us." The ballroom erupted in laughter, but this time it wasn't unanimous. Beneath the laughter came uneasy murmurs. A few guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, realizing the spectacle had crossed a line. "Dad," Jonathan tried again, his voice tight. "This has gone too far." "Hey, shut up, Jonathan," William snapped, his words as sharp as a whip. "We're too soft. That's your problem. This is the real world. There's a natural hierarchy, and people like her," he jabbed a finger toward Kesha, "need to know their place." But Kesha was already moving. Not to the center of the floor. Not yet. She stretched. Small, precise movements that most of the guests missed, but Marcus didn't miss them. His breath caught in his throat. Those weren't random stretches. They were preparatory drills. The same ones he had seen her do 15 years ago, backstage at the National Theater, before a performance that had left the audience in tears. "Oh my God," Marcus muttered under his breath. "She's really going to do this." Victoria, realizing that the room's attention was slipping away from her, snapped her fingers at the DJ. Start the music, she ordered coldly. "Let's get this charade over with." The DJ hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, but obeyed. A classical waltz floated into the air. Victoria glided to the center of the floor, executing crisp but shallow steps. Her posture was polished, her spins competent, her gestures rehearsed. She was the product of expensive private lessons and elite country clubs. To the untrained eye, she looked impressive enough. Polite applause followed, not for skill, but for status. To that audience, she was everything that belonged on that stage. Wealthy, white, and socially untouchable. "Well done, dear," William clapped with theatrical exaggeration. And now his grin widened like a predator circling its prey. "Let's give our guest artist her moment." Kesha stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. Each step was precise, weighted with dignity. This was not how a defeated woman moved. The murmurs grew louder. Something felt different. Something felt different. Something felt wrong about mocking her now. "What song would you like?" the DJ asked, more out of obligation than respect. "The same one," Kesha replied softly. William's laugh cut through the silence like glass. "Oh, how lovely. She wants a second chance." He turned to the crowd. "All right then. Let's see how long she lasts before she crawls away." What no one in that room understood, what William could not possibly know, was that Kesha had chosen that song for a reason. It wasn't just a waltz. It was her waltz. It was her waltz. She had danced it hundreds of times during her career. The movements lived in her muscles and her bones like breathing. And more than that, it was the final piece she had performed before the accident. A night when the audience at the National Theater had risen to their feet in a 5-minute ovation. A night critics had called transcendent. A night that cemented her as one of the greatest ballerinas of her generation. Now, 15 years later, in a glittering ballroom that had mocked her, that same song would carry her into battle. As the first notes swelled through the speakers, Kesha closed her eyes. And in the darkness behind her eyelids, she wasn't in that ballroom anymore. She was back on stage, back under the lights, back where she belonged. She remembered the feeling of flight, the sensation of her body merging with music until there was no separation between the two. The doctors had said she would never dance again. The media had written her obituary as an artist, and for years, Kesha herself had believed them. Until, slowly, painfully, she began rebuilding. Not only her muscles, but her relationship with the art that had once defined her life. She had never returned to the stage. She had never sought an audience, but she had never truly stopped. In the solitude of small apartments and empty late-night rooms, she danced, quietly, desperately, to keep herself alive. Now, under the sneers of privilege and arrogance, she would dance again. The music began. And with it, something shifted. Her arms lifted with surgical precision so refined that even the musicians frowned, sensing immediately that this was no amateur. A strange hush fell over the room. No one realized it yet, but the first few bars of that waltz would mark not only the rebirth of a lost legend, but the collapse of an empire built on arrogance. Kesha began to move. Not with the clumsy hesitation they were expecting, but with a grace that bent the air around her. Each step shimmered with control. Each turn seemed to pull the room into her orbit. Gravity itself felt weaker when she rose. At first, she gave them only fragments, soft, restrained movements, keeping expectations low. But then, as the music swelled, she unleashed what had been sleeping inside her for 15 years. Her body became pure poetry, a sequence of pirouettes so seamless the audience gasped aloud. A grand jeté that carried her across the floor as though she were weightless. These were not ballroom tricks. This was ballet, world-class ballet, woven seamlessly into the waltz. William Thompson's smirk faltered. Victoria's polite smile froze on her face. For the first time all night, the laughter stopped. Someone in the audience whispered, almost in awe. This isn't a performance. This is history. Kesha's movements deepened with emotion, transcending mere technique. Every turn, every leap carried the anguish of survival, the strength of years of pain, and the resilience of someone who had clawed her way back from nothing. Marcus, true to his word, discreetly filmed the scene. Not just her, but the audience. Their awe, their disbelief. And most of all, the unraveling face of William Thompson, whose scorn had curdled into confusion, then dread. "This is impossible," William muttered, his voice cracking. "I in the hell is this woman?" Then it happened. Kesha launched into the signature sequence that had once been her crown jewel at the National Theater, a fusion of classical ballet and modern expression that no one else in the world could replicate. It was hers, a creation critics had once hailed as groundbreaking. Recognition struck like lightning. A woman in the audience, a well-known patron of the arts, gasped and clutched her pearls. "Oh wait, I know those steps. I know that sequence. But it can't be." Jonathan Thompson could barely breathe. He wasn't filming anymore, not for blackmail or leverage, but because he couldn't stop himself. His hands shook as he captured every second, not as evidence, but as reverence. He recognized genius when he saw it. The music climbed toward its climax. Kesha turned into a storm, a series of fautes, endless spins that demanded impossible strength and balance. The crowd erupted into gasps and broken applause. Some stood without realizing it. This wasn't a cleaning woman on a ballroom floor. This was resurrection. The final note struck. Kesha froze in her ending pose, powerful, vulnerable, utterly unbroken. And in the silence that followed, the entire hall held its breath. Her arms outstretched, her head held high with absolute dignity. Her breathing remained steady, as though she had not just defied both physics and destiny. The silence stretched. It was not the silence of politeness. It was the silence of revelation. Then, a single clap, then another, and within moments, the entire hall was erupting into thunderous applause. "A bravo!" someone shouted. "Extraordinary!" another echoed. The sound filled the chandeliers, rattled the windows, and washed over Kesha like the ovation she had once thought lost forever. William Thompson, pale as marble, sat frozen. His power, his control, his arrogance, all shattered in a single performance. The very people whose approval he craved now looked at him with disdain, and then Marcus stepped forward, still recording. His voice carried through the hall with quiet authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce Kesha Morrow, former principal soloist of the American National Ballet." The name detonated like a bomb. Gasps rippled across the crowd. A patron of the arts clutched her chest. "Ah, Kesha Morrow? But she..." "Impossible," Victoria Thompson stammered, her painted smile cracking. "Morrow is dead. Or at least she never danced again." Key's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Clearly," she said, "rumors of my death have been greatly exaggerated." Laughter rippled through the crowd, but William wasn't laughing, he was unraveling. He had just publicly mocked and humiliated one of America's greatest living artists on camera. And then Marcus twisted the knife. "Oh, Mr. Thompson," he said, holding his phone aloft, the red recording light still blinking. "Not long ago you declared, before this entire room, that if Miss Morrow danced better than your wife, you would see her married to your son. I believe the evidence speaks for itself." Jonathan stepped forward, his face set with something between shame and resolve. "Miss Morrow," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I want to offer my deepest apologies. My father's behavior tonight was cruel and unforgivable." "Jonathan, shut up," William roared, his mask cracking. The air of control he once carried had dissolved into raw desperation. "You will not apologize to anyone, least of all her." It was then that Kesha revealed the full scope of her plan. "Oh, Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice calm, almost amused, "I believe we have a marriage proposal to discuss." "After all, a man of your standing surely keeps his word, doesn't he?" The crowd fell silent. Every guest understood the stakes. This was no longer about humiliation. It was about honor, reputation, survival. William's voice was a snarl. "You must be insane if you think I'll honor a drunken joke." "Ah," Kesha countered softly, but it wasn't a joke. She nodded to Marcus, and Marcus pressed play. William's voice filled the hall, crystal clear. "If she can dance better than Victoria, I'll marry her to my son." Laughter from earlier echoed faintly in the recording. Then William's own voice again, doubling down, sneering, "And when she fails, she'll clean this room on her knees." Now, hearing it again, the guests recoiled. Their laughter from minutes ago sounded cruel, monstrous. Marcus let the clip finish, then raised his phone for all to see. "The record is clear. The terms were set, and now they are met." A wave of murmurs swept the crowd. Some laughed nervously. Others whispered with delight, hungry to see William trapped in his own arrogance. "That's blackmail!" William shouted, his composure in ruins, sweat beading his forehead. "Oh, no," Kesha corrected, her voice steady, razor sharp. "This is accountability." The next morning, New York woke up to chaos. Clips of Kesha's performance had spread across every platform. Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, even international news broadcasts. Headlines blared, "A millionaire humiliates legendary ballerina and loses everything. Kesha Morrow's triumphant return, William Thompson exposed, racism, classism, and broken promises." By breakfast, the video had been watched over 20 million times. By lunch, it was 40. By dinner, it was over 100 million. But the applause online wasn't for William. Clients pulled their contracts. Shareholders demanded answers. Overnight, Thompson Holdings hemorrhaged $3 million in deals. And the bleeding had only just begun. News anchors replayed Marcus' recording on loop. A 500 says she won't finish the song. 1,000 says she runs out crying. William's smug voice had become the soundtrack of his own downfall. Victoria refused to leave her penthouse, hiding from paparazzi swarming outside. Her name trended too, not for her socialite glamour, but for the sneer she had worn while laughing at Kesha. Cold as Victoria became a hashtag, used to roast elitist cruelty worldwide. Jonathan, meanwhile, was the only Thompson whose reputation soared. The moment he told his father, "Some things are more important than money," Like Integrity was clipped, subtitled in 20 languages, and shared as a meme. Overnight, he became a symbol of rebellion against toxic privilege. As for Kesha, her inbox exploded. Invitations from theaters, companies, and producers around the world poured in. The legend returns. A second act begins. She had gone from anonymous survival jobs to global acclaim, not by chasing it, but by embodying dignity when the world least expected it. But Kesha wasn't rushing. For the first time in 15 years, she was free to choose. She met Jonathan the next evening for dinner at a quiet restaurant in Harlem, her choice, not his. Away from the glittering elites, they talked not of contracts or scandals, but of books, music, childhood dreams. "Aw, why me?" Jonathan asked softly. "After everything, after him." Kesha smiled. Because you saw me before anyone else did. Not the name, not the fall, just me." Back downtown, William Thompson sat alone in his office, blinds drawn, phone buzzing endlessly with calls he refused to answer. His empire crumbled brick by brick, tweet by tweet. For a man who lived on reputation, there was nothing more devastating than watching it burn. And it was only the beginning. His partners were demanding an emergency meeting, and Victoria had locked herself in their bedroom, refusing to appear in public. "Dad," Jonathan said, finding his father slumped in his office, surrounded by newspapers screaming humiliating headlines. Thompson Empire collapses. Disgrace on Wall Street. The bet that broke a billionaire. "The board has voted," Jonathan continued, his voice steady. "You have 1 hour to resign, or they'll remove you by force." William looked up at his son, seeing for the first time not obedience, but strength. His voice cracked. "You did this? You betrayed me." No," Jonathan replied. His tone was calm, but his eyes held steel. "You betrayed yourself, the moment you decided your arrogance was worth more than your humanity." Meanwhile, Kessia's phone never stopped ringing. 3 international ballet companies wanted her to choreograph. Lincoln Center offered her a solo event. Hollywood producers fought over rights to her story. But the offer that touched her most came in a tiny envelope from the children at the community school where she once volunteered. They had pooled together their savings, $23, to offer her a scholarship to return as their teacher. Ketchy's eyes filled with tears. "I'll take it," she said, smiling through the emotion. "But only on one condition. Let's turn this into something bigger." 6 months later, the Kesha Morrow Center for the Arts opened its doors in the heart of Manhattan. Funded by donations pouring in from across the world, it became a sanctuary for children who had been told a no too many times. Jonathan Thompson, now the head of a reformed and socially responsible family business, was the first major donor. He had planted the gardens himself, insisting that beauty should grow from the ground up. William Thompson, meanwhile, had lost everything. His company, his reputation, his family. Victoria filed for divorce and fled to Europe. The once untouchable mogul was last seen working as a consultant in a back office, a shadow of the man who once thought money gave him the right to humiliate others. You know what impresses me most?" Marcus said during the center's opening, watching Kesha guide a group of laughing, diverse children through their first ballet steps. "It wasn't just a victory over prejudice. It was proof that true nobility is revealed in how we respond to cruelty." Kesha smiled, her heart full. "Sometimes we have to lose everything," she said softly, "to discover who we really are. And sometimes people have to lose everything to learn who they should never have tried to be." Jonathan approached then, carrying a bouquet of flowers freshly picked from the center's garden. "Ready for dinner?" he asked, offering his arm. "Ready," Kesha replied, accepting not just his arm, but the life she had rebuilt from ashes, stronger, freer, and brighter than before. Because Kessia's true revenge was never William Thompson's downfall. It was the fact that she had built something so beautiful, so enduring, that his cruelty was reduced to nothing but a footnote. Her dance had transformed the world, and now her story was transforming lives.